Is your longitude lying to you? Is your geodesic great arc not lining up with your linear life? Just kidding. In all seriousness, though, we're about to go over the literal measuring stick that we apply to all observations, experiences, distances, and routes on Earth. Let's make sure that's on the up and up before we start applying everything in the world to it. Let's get started. All right, so we're going to finish our deep dive into longitude today, I think. We're going to go through the Royal Society, a little bit of the history of longitude, the Board of Longitude, the Act of Longitude, the derivation of longitude, etc. But what we're going to start with is this information dump where all of the world's information on longitude comes from. It's called the RGO Archives. It's from Cambridge University Library. Literally says it consists of all the surviving historical paper records of the Royal Observatory from 1675 until circa 1980, though many later records are held and the collection accrues as material is deposited. They include the papers of the various Astronomers Royal and successive directors, records created by different departments, official sets of Royal Observatory and HMNAO publications, papers of the Board of Longitude, and visual and audio-visual collections. Again, this is all the evidence, the paperwork, the historical documents that we have that tells us about this historic period of time. It includes the complete run of the surviving papers of the Board of Longitude through the 18th century until its abolition in 1828, and these papers throw a vivid light on the role of the British state in encouraging invention and discovery, on the energetic culture of technical ingenuity in the long 18th century, and on many aspects of exploration and maritime travel in the Pacific Ocean and the Arctic. Now again, if this sounds like a little bit of propaganda, you might be on the right track. So it says that all this material was presented here was digitized as part of a partnership between Cambridge University Library, the National Maritime Museum, and the AHRC funded Board of Longitude project, presented fully digitized versions of the complete archive and associated materials alongside detailed metadata, contextual essays, video, educational resources, and hundreds of links through to relevant objects in the National Maritime Museum's online collections. Since the initial launch of the digitized collection in 2014, further material has been added, including papers relating to the transit of Venus, drawings and paintings of the observatory at Greenwich and by women who lived there, and material from the papers of George Biddle Airy. So essentially, ladies and gentlemen, is everything that we know about longitude in this time frame of 300 years comes from this digitized archive dump released in 2014, courtesy of your favorite Royal Society stooge, literally in this case, the Cambridge University Library. So, with that out of the way, just keep in mind everything we will go over in this video will be part of this information dump and at least in my mind, therefore, hugely suspect to what the hell is going on. Why would they dump this time capsule of relative historic tidbits right into the historical time frame, right at, covering 300 years, and they released it in 2014. Happened to digitize it all at once. All the historical records from a time frame digitized at once and released to the public. Just to put it in proper context. And let's take a look at what this video is, because they have 3 prepared very short videos that sort of introduce the topic, right? And let's watch them together and see how we feel.
The Board of Longitude Archive is an outstanding record of 18th and 19th century attempts to improve navigation at sea. Cambridge University Library and Royal Museums Greenwich have digitized the entire archive, making everything available online for the first time. In 1714, the British government offered rewards of up to £20,000, millions today, to anyone who could accurately find longitude at sea. Up till then, ships had struggled to accurately plot their position, meaning voyages could take far longer than expected. They knew their latitude, their position from north to south, from the location of the sun, but could only estimate their longitude, their position from east to west. So a group of experts, later called the Board of Longitude, was created to judge and reward inventors and inventions that could measure longitude. Open to the public, some were simply not feasible.
This is not deserving of the board's attention.
But 2 methods succeeded. Both tried to measure time at the ship and at a known reference point, one by astronomical means, the other using clocks. Mathematicians and astronomers charted the moon's position and predicted its future movements, eventually creating a nautical almanac that allowed vessels to accurately plot their longitude. Meanwhile, John Harrison worked to create a more accurate timekeeper. Clocks hadn't been reliable enough until then, but after 30 years of working with the board, Harrison made a watch that could help find longitude at sea. The board documented their progress towards this and their other work, creating a vast archive. The papers record scientific endeavour, pioneering exploration, fateful voyages, and lifetimes of commitment to a common cause.
Well, I'm excited for that stories of serving of propaganda. I mean, absolute real news. Let's see what the second one has.
The Board of Longitude sent astronomers on voyages of exploration to test methods of navigation and help make more accurate maps. Without better maps, improvements to navigation would have been useless. In 1772, the board sent William Wales and William Bailey on Captain Cook's second voyage to the Pacific and Antarctic Oceans. They used portable observatories to establish the longitude and latitude of the places they explored. Patiently traversed the coast, sketching it and dropping sounding leads to measure the ocean's depth, and worked out the distance of key features using triangulation. The maps they made were also used to claim places the British hadn't visited before as new discoveries for their country. Astronomers could earn £400 a year, a good wage at that time, but they could make even more if they did some trading on the side. As well as official logbooks, the archive contains letters and personal papers. The young astronomer William Gooch was a particularly prolific writer. He was sent out to join Vancouver's expedition to the northwest coast of America, and his letters paint the voyage in vivid detail. His journey didn't end well. He was killed on one of the Hawaiian Islands. But his workbooks and letters home remain in the Board of Longitude's archive as a record of his travels.
Well, thankfully he was passed on to us so we could, find the records and learn his story, man. What else would we do otherwise? It would be crazy. Let's go back to the actual part 3 here and see what our third creepy tale from the digitized archive released in 2014 solely has to offer to us.
Greenwich lies at the heart of British attempts to discover accurate and practical methods of finding longitude at sea. In the 1600s, people knew that longitude could be worked out by comparing time on board a ship with time at a reference point, like Greenwich. Astronomers hoped to use the moon's motion relative to the stars as a giant celestial clock. From 1676, the Astronomer Royal and his assistants recorded the stars' positions from the Royal Observatory in Greenwich. When the 5th Astronomer Royal, Neville Maskelyne, started his new job in 1765, he thought of a better way to process the observations. Instead of just getting his assistants to do the calculations, he sent the observations to people across Britain called computers, who then turned them into the tables in the Nautical Almanac. Processing so much data was tedious to say the least, but you could work from home. Neville employed a separate team of comparers to check for mistakes in copying. Once the almanac was ready, each volume predicted the moon's position for a given year. To find their longitude, sailors used sextants to measure the lunar distance or angle between the moon and a star, did some complicated sums to work out the moon's position as if viewed from the center of the Earth, and then consulted the almanac to find the exact time at Greenwich. They compared this time with local time on board the ship to find out how far east or west they were of Greenwich. By 1884, over 2/3 of the world's ships were using Greenwich as a reference. And the International Meridian Conference recommended Greenwich as the world's prime meridian.
Well, now we have the complete contextual framework for what we're going to explore, and needless to say, I would be skeptical of all of this information, but for at least the interim, for the beginning, I'm going to present it as if we're going through it historically. I'm going to outline the story as I encountered it, and before I had decided to go a different way with this whole project, this is what it would have entailed. So let's go through this as we would otherwise, and then we'll We'll look in to see how else we can apply it and what else might be going on, all right? And then, of course, the University of Cambridge site starts us off with a little bit of a brief interlude, same sort of contextualization historically. A small observatory within our royal park at Greenwich. This is when they wanted to build, in 1674, the Royal Observatory to the King, and that they wanted to build one, let's see, the much desired longitude of places. That was the purpose. They had the construction to find the longitude, right? 250 years they sat at this observatory, developing what? What were they looking at, do we think here? Magnetic and atmospheric pollution for a Second World War? I doubt it. The removal of magnetic and meteorological department? I'm not sure. Completed its final move next to a site in Cambridge. Yeah, 1998. So essentially, from 1675 until 1980, they had this spot looking south, sitting here on the prime meridian, soon to be prime meridian. And then they just wrote and wrote and wrote and did a whole bunch of shady shit, essentially. All right, so the Astronomers Royal was a group decreed by the Royal Society to lead the astronomers in whatever their endeavors were for that time period, right? Which we probably should get through and will culminate in Aries' failure/success, depending on your perspective, which will guide us into our next sort of series of projects. So this is the brief outline of the digitized historical blurb that comes through the wonderful philanthropy of the Royal Society to be digitized and released to us in 2014. Here's the itinerary they want us to go through: the papers, the people, the heroes, the folklore, the story, the problem, the Hegelian dialectic, if you will, the problem, reaction, solution, situation, which they, of course, had instilled in us over here. We're gonna take a truncated route through this because our spidey senses are tingling, so we're gonna go through what we call our version of that. We're gonna start with, let's say, maps, right? Because this whole search started with me as a search into maps to figure out where I could deduce the globe map came from, where it was introduced, how we had missed it, how they had snuck it by us. I was determined I could find out. Turns out I did find out, I think, but not where I was looking here. So let's start with the coordinate system from which all maps are projected. So if you had, say, a map projector program, let's go get ours. Let's say it's Map Projector Plus. Let's see, this is a NASA program. Let's see, I think I have it over here. I believe it's called G Projector, so I definitely have some of the NASA's recommended software. So we'll go to where I put up my folder, right? Map Projector. Here's where I hit my sample maps. Well, let's just grab, say, anyone, okay? Perfect. I'm gonna open it up. We have a nice Mercator square map. Let's say, we don't want equirectangular though. We're gonna say, let's move it to, ooh, I don't know, Edward Crow's, whatever this is, right? Nice and easy. So as long as they use this longitude and lat system, you see how it dictates that I have to have this over here, right? As long as it reads this, I can move, incorporate, import, export, translate, transform, go in, go out. I can do whatever I want to this projection. It'll always equal exactly what I had before, right? So if we do this and we equal that out, there's a nice sinusoidal, right? So that'll be fun. Logarithmic, oh, that's cool. That's a cool map. I didn't know we could do that. But the whole point of this map software is that once I have a coordinate system, a longitude and latitude curve coordinate system, which is what powers all map projections, and from that coordinate system, I can project any map at any point, any of these 200 different projections. So if they're literally all equal, if they are translatable into each other with no loss in integrity of data or translational power back and forth, then they're all equal. They're literally equal. The distances may be different, but again, we have different types of maps. If that brings us back here, we have area preserving, we have shape preserving, we have direction preserving, we have distance preserving. we have other types. We have cylindrical, conic, azimuthal, and pseudo-cylindrical. Those are different just tools that you can use, different types of tools. But more importantly for us, we have equal area, equivalent projections, conformal projections, equidistant projections, retaining distances from one or 2 points. Equal area is preserving the correct proportions of areas. Azimuthal projections from the center outward, preserving directions and distance. And compromise projections. It's essential to understand that no map can be non-distorted. However, once the Royal Society had determined the longitude and latitude lines, they had kept them secret. From those coordinates, they project every other map, all up to the 200 map projections that we know and love today. They all came from this so now secret set of coordinates that has never been released, that has never been challenged, and no one's ever seen. And the globe is, of course, one of these projections that happens to be the curved one that they allowed distances to match on, at least insinuating that the primary set of coordinates they also arranged in a curvature before they would project all of the map coordinates that we know of today. So let's start with our favorite. Here's a nice azimuthal equidistant map, and it has these scaling circles at each latitude to show you what you're dealing with as far as stretching and laterally compressing, right? So I find this super useful when you're actually taking a look at what we're going to be dealing with when you're trying to do distance or proportionate scaling. And again, something equivalent for this type of map. Look at the scaling is more towards the edges but less in the middle, and more proportionate. Of course, we have way towards the edges and less in the middle. Again, just proportionate scaling. This one is what, the cylindrical projection conical map. I like that one. And my favorite, azimuthal equidistant, right? This one's really cool. And expanding lines of longitude, etc. All warp images of land, right? They have tricked us to think that, oh, the world must be curved because the coordinate system from which we project all maps is curved. That's when the geodesic distances match. Of course, now we know better that they are coordinate system transforming things back and forth, this and left and right, all day long, every day, seamlessly, mathematically, with no issues whatsoever. So that's not a big deal. We understand that. So the issue that we're going to run into with the longitude historicity is there's a period that everyone has local longitude, and it blurs really well with the period where they decided everyone needed royal longitude universally, and it's intentionally hard to differentiate the two. So we'll start with the Greek and the Roman and the historicity that they injected, and we'll go to the actual history of latitude and longitude. Again, it's going to start in Greece with some Greeks, of course. Whenever you invent some history, you need some Greeks. And you need some Greeks to invent the things that you're going to use through people when you're going to implant some history. So they say that, the first maps came out of Greece in the 13th century. They had these developments. Age of exploration came along, and all of a sudden, we need real unified longitude. Oh, 1500s, Christopher Columbus. Oh, sailed to America, but didn't have longitude, so had some issues. Now we need longitude. That's suspicious. That's not why that happened, but hey, we'll keep going. Mid-1500s, Mercator, a Flemish inventor, had the Mercator map projection, which was, let's go check that out. What was important about this one? Oh, we can accurately represent the surface of the globe now because it's a usable scale, which would be useful to all other maps. So essentially, they would crack and break as if it was flattened because it would easily transform to a plane, and they'd take this map and fold it and literally equidistantly, laterally mark it out and use it as a sort of marker, right? So the pieces were accurate because they're equivalent. The distances were accurate because it was equivalent. It was an area equal equivalence map, and the directions were, of course, also equal. So it literally had a very useful trait. So that's why people use it all the time. And again, having the longitude lines that would then be on the globe is a little bit suspicious in the timeline. But we go through the rest of the 15, 16, 1700s. They had maps showing various parts of the world had not been mapped before. It's weird that they were already mapped with cartographic longitude, but we won't go into that. Brief little rant. They said, oh, we had advancement. So compasses, telescopes, sextants, quadrants, printing areas, printing press, technological revolution. Sure. The conformal conic, right? Okay, but geological survey probably had a bigger part to do than the tools. And the National Geodetic Survey now is, GPS is to survey, quote, the land. So here's the general imprint of maps that they go through for the historicity of what they used them for. Interestingly, no map that you'll find anywhere in the world that isn't using the coordinate system that is instantly translatable with this. So again, if I can't use it to equidistantly import into this system, these 200 map projections, for my longitude and latitude system, if I can't use it, it is not a map. It is a artistic rendering. That is what they say. If I can't use it in here, it is not a map. Interesting, right? Interesting that only maps can use longitude, latitude deriving from the geodesic arcs that is the longitude lat system of the globe, right? Of the globe being a main projection, but the AE map being a main projection, or all the other maps an equal projection. So, back through the brief history of maps. We have these maps, you say. Are they maps? Geographia. Commonly referred to as the first map, the birth of cartography, Ptolemy's map, a coordinate system of latitude and longitude for accurate navigation, they say. Mapped thousands of years of corresponding coordinates, and was the first to use perspective projection to display the globe. Wow, all those years ago, and he was the first to successfully use a map. Not only that to successfully make a map, but successfully use a map to project the globe. What an accomplishment, guys. The Geographia was literally just the first globe projection. Bravo, Ptolemy. I can't believe all those years ago you set us on the right path so successfully. Anyway, following the fall of the Roman Empire, they had cartographic advances, or should we call cosmographic advances? Should have mentioned that. At first was cosmography, the study of the cosmology, which then they put to maps and broken up into cosmology and cartography. So it started as cosmography. Let's bring it back and elevate. So the Tabula Virginia, the recreation for him who wishes to travel through the country. So this is a map of the period, again using what they would now be as an artistic rendering because it doesn't fit into this program. Again, all maps past 1900 fit into here, or they are not maps. Gotta say it again. And we have these artistic renderings with a slight cartographical swirl, I guess you could say. Oh, the age of exploration came and everything had to change, right? We needed early expeditions, we needed knowledge. They needed to produce nautical maps. So it sounds like we're stirring up the need for longitude. Gonna do that Hegelian dialectic. We're gonna instill the need for the solution that we have prepackaged, ready to dish out. So Spanish cartographer Juan de la Casa traveled with Columbus, produced the first map depicting both North and South America. Wow, just in time. It contained accurate depictions of the coastlines. Oh, that's very impressive. 69, we have Mercator used the global knowledge gained from the age of exploration. Wait, didn't we just have this? Didn't we just start this age of exploration? We just declared this was the need for the longitude. No? We're already past it? Okay. So now all of a sudden we have the Mercator projection. Haven't invented longitude yet. Still haven't explained longitude. Still have the Greeks that invented longitude only using it locally across the roads as the prime meridian, an island in Greece, island in Rome. Island in Rome. And we have a mathematician Mercator using a cylindrical projection. Again, as we know how maps work, we have 1500, a cylindrical projection of what? What do you have in this year 1500 to project a map coordinate system from? Are they already using an equivalent of this? No. This seems to be a typo. That can't be right. You don't have anything from which to project the map yet, quite people. Okay. Anyway, we do have parallel lines. You can make grids. We can use a grid. We can use that to equidistantly navigate. Sure, no problem. But we do not have any of these, right? We do not have cylindrical projections. A projection of what? Anyway. Industrial Revolution, a huge change. We'll hide some of our rampant historicity rewriting in there. It's always what they do. War. Oh, they love to hide their shit in the war. Let's just drop into, let's say, the next section. So that was the maps. The brief intro to maps. And then we're going to go to the brief historicity of the Royal Society so we can finish up with what they actually did. Essentially hopping right in, right? We're going to start with the Paris Observatory, where they are doing this lunar distance method of celestial navigation, right? So they don't have longitude, they have latitude, but they seem to be totally fine. Cardinal Richelieu, the king's chief minister in France, set up a commissioner to examine a claim put forward by Jean-Baptiste Morin that had discovered a way of finding longitude, right? So they put out the supposed call to find the method of longitude with the most degree of accuracy down to the half degree of longitude. What he proposed became known as the lunar distance method, proposed by Werner, taking into account refraction and lunar parallax. Well, we can go right into just a brief history of Greenwich, the rise of Greenwich, right? The actual story headed in the digital release in 2014 that they gave to us so freely. So it starts in 1492 with Columbus. Let's see. Observations latitudinally from the pole star. So I'm assuming this is going to result in a longitudinal deficit that's going to need some more longitude at the end, right? Let's see. There was no reliable way of measuring the ship's longitude. Oh, crazy. No way. It became urgent to find a longitude problem. Well, they are setting this up right away. Okay. So let's just go through it. Each 15 degrees of longitude is equivalent to a difference of 1 hour. And then they just use it as a metric of time, the same way that the celestial sphere becomes right inclination and right ascension and declinations, or time and angular. An angular measurement. So they has the idea of a clock to see. Oh, but no, there was too inaccurate of clocks to be of use. No, nothing to be of use. We don't have anything, no sir. But then there was the introduction of the pendulum clock in 1657, specifically to revolutionize positional astronomy. Guys, this reads like a folklore, like a fable, right? Pendulum couldn't work on a moving ship. That couldn't possibly keep accurately time swinging back and forth. No. We need a chronometer of some sort. When measured against the background of stars, their main method of celestial navigation was this lunar transit, right? So they know that the moon traces approximately the same path of stars. They set out to memorize those stars so they could do transits. They're known as the clock stars. They're the most luminous stars around the celestial equator. Let's see, their star charts were too inaccurate, they say, to be able to pull this off. Okay, so the solution is to wait until the invention of the telescope and the pendulum clock in the 17th century, and then they'll be waiting for the tools they'll need. In 1610, they are also using the telescope to use and observe the 4 moons of Jupiter. So these are the earliest celestial transmit method as well. They use the eclipses as a interval to use a mean of a chronometer, literally to tell time through the transit methods of Jupiter's 4 moon eclipses. So that the eclipse cycle of Jupiter's moons was steady enough for them to use as a clock. So they progressed through this. Now we're into Galileo. They created an understanding of the motions, etc. for the clock. They needed a still, of course, to find longitude at sea. So important all of a sudden that this is what they're doing. Again, this is the Royal Society's goal. They've persuaded the whole world into doing it with their bidding again. The invention of the pendulum clock and the tables that you could accurately measure by, with French astronomer Cassini in 1668, was a good step in the right direction, but not the Royal Society sponsored universal longitude that we needed, guys. So in 1634, Cardinal Richelieu, the minister in France, set up a commission to examine a claim so they could find a way of finding longitude. What they had put forth was the lunar distance method, again 1634, and they had set this up to study to get ready for this to do in 1514. So already 100 years of practice for the lunar distance method proposed by Werner, and now into account refraction, lunar parallax, and a shift because they have it down now. And lo and behold, the observatory in 1667, right? But then an accident that we never find out about, having some small kill, then it disappears, and then it gets rebuilt. Don't worry about that. Off we go. So we start with the first star catalog, Tycho Brahe, right? With whom Kepler made observations, whom Newton stole from. They said it was prone to errors. It meant that longitude could be an error of several hundred miles. Oh boy, no good. We need longitude unified, for real, for you, for us. We're gonna help you, help us, guys. So the astronomical observator, to apply himself to the exact care and diligence to the rectifying of the tables of the motions of the heavens and the places of the fixed stars. So they must find the desired longitude for places of perfecting the art of navigation. 1675, they have a warrant from the king to build the observatory at Greenwich. So, again, 1675, we're ready to set the stage for what we're going to do next. Right, so once they have the building of the Royal Observatory, we are off to the races, essentially, right? So they have prescribed the lunar distance method into a task that took 91 years, and now it is a souped up, ready to use lunar transit method. Right? Apparently can do accuracy of about 10 degrees or 600 miles. Of course, this is manageable, but not good enough for the unified longitude that they need to all of a sudden that they need to navigate the seas. So what they did is have localized longitude with star charts. They had maps, of course, these maps for the local areas. There are instruments that they use, and we'll get into that in a little while. So the setting up of the Board of Longitude. Here we go. It offered a reward to anyone who could find a means of measuring longitude at sea, £10,000. If you could find a method at a degree of 1 great circle, or 60 geographical miles, £15,000. If 2/3 of that distance, £20,000. And if you can get to 1/2 of the same distance, £2,000, which would be about a million gold, right? So now we have the contextual preface for the inclination of the Board of Longitude. Essentially, these people empowered themselves to and willed themselves with the power to instill longitude. It's crazy. They still circle jerk like this today. A look at the given name and the group of commissioners who appointed themselves the government awards or prizes, which would put the public prizes for finding longitude at sea. So apparently, for 1714 to 1828, they're really going on this method. The Astronomer Royal set this method to the date, and off they go, to sit around and hear the best methods of finding longitude at sea, so they can decide what to do. So they said they could not adequately model the orbit of the moon. It was so hard. They were practicing. They mocked all the clock stars. They couldn't quite get it. But now they're invoking a sorrow cycle, it seems, over the period of a complete sorrow cycle, which is just a butchered-ized portion of the solar lunar cycle and taken out a team of eclipses within 70 eclipses that, by itself has no meaning. 18 years for the Earth and the Sun to return to the same geometry for the lunar table. Again, that's referencing the lunar cycle of 18 and 10 and 11 months. For more than 2 centuries, they had perfected this method for the Astronomers Royal. Each one of these people wrote their special papers, which were meant to go through to determine the history. It's kind of like a lore book in a video game. Like they'll put it in a desk somewhere, and you're meant to stumble on it and read it and get some brief contextualization. Stick to the story. So they had 2 influences, they say. Warrants, and those succeeding were the different method of doing public ballots. They put out a reward, and people would do it for the good of the people, and they'd give out the king's money. So they said they were reflecting the astronomer's royal interest in physical astronomy. Yay! So they assigned the royal astronomer and then get the duties therein to start doing this, right? So they have a royal astronomer and the royal astronomer duties. Here we go, off to sea to fill out this wonderful journey and adventure calling that, of course, they were always having to do. So here's a report of the first star map, the Nautical and Naval Almanac, all the star locations. We'll just hop right to the start here. So we have the invention of the quadrant right here. John Hadley, the hero of our tale, people. He had invented the reflecting quadrant, the first instrument capable of making angular measurements on board ship with enough accuracy for the lunar distance method to work. Wow, Hadley, what an incredible guy. The Board of Longitude had indicated that this was to be the creative award. Okay, so he earned some money for enabling this invention for the lunar transit method to work at sea. Now we just need a clock to keep time enough for us to use this. Oh boy, I wonder if we'll be able to make a clock, guys. I wonder if we'll put the word out. Seems like a challenge has been raised. So now they're really honing in on this lunar transit method. It's the best they got. They're honing down, they're practicing. The Board of Longitude in 1755 sent word to the Admiralty Board that, hey, we were on our way inconclusive, even though we had heavily featured the quadrant to incorporate the new instrument and the new tables. We definitely maybe got it. So on with the French lunar method. The French astronomer Lacaille became the first person to use lunar distance successfully at sea with his own lunar tables. How nice. So in 1761, he contained diagrams for the solutions of all these tables for the pre-computed lunar distances. Again, this is the transit method of the moon across the set clock stars through the middle. And he transited the Venus through St. Helens and used this to accurately mark within 1 degree the Mariner's Guide, okay, which is another correction of tables based on celestial navigation correction. So, on to John Harrison, the true hero of our story, rather. His 20 years of trying had managed to build a timekeeper that would be good enough time at sea. 1761, right? Took it on this trial. Guy never made a clock, never did anything but taught himself clockmaking, came up with the best damn clock that's ever been, just to spite Newton from his decree, and just in time to save the world for this longitude board that they were setting in. I mean, it's a hell of a story. Anyway, in 1765, they had published the final lunar table, for 300, which they had awarded for contributing towards the derivation of longitude for the southern reaches. So they're giving out $10,000 at this point. However, the common benefit of navigation is, of course, common good, common for everyone. Everyone needs longitude, guys, not just the Royal Society. So they say over and over again. They'd use this method. It was a proper star on each side of her, calculated carefully for every 6 hours, and those computations would yield the lunar transit method with the degree of specificity that they have today. So that leads to the first nautical almanac in 1767, which are, again, guess it guys, collections of correction tables. Yay, right. So corresponding to Greenwich time and the moon's position, now they have a unified longitude system, essentially, to mark unified local time. Right? Simple as time. Tables prerequisite. So they're looking at observations in the sky via elevations, and they're waiting the prescribed number of time for this to pass. So we have the first almanac correction table and the rise of Greenwich. So now we're getting down to the meat and potatoes of it here. Again, the lunar distance method, the way of celestially navigating at sea. Using a nautical almanac, you need the time and the longitude from Greenwich. So they made sure that the method that everyone would use would need the time unified from the place where they built the observatory. Go figure. They have marine chronometers, which would be the timekeepers at sea, built by this guy. After the quadrant, said that expensive and scarce, but actually sooner they built enough to mass produce, and here they go to produce the conference that they would then pay the guy for. Instrument of the Observatory of Greenwich as the initial meridian for longitude. What an idea to put forth. Crazy that everyone supported it immediately when they elected it themselves. Crazy how that worked out. Almost too good, right? So they invented this lunar distance method, used it for about 80 years, and then chronometers became the best way to do lunar distance, which of course means that right into GPS. So save themselves the progression to progress right into GPS, where they immediately started doing surveys to map the rest of the sky, right? Because surveying is never about the ground, always about mapping the celestial sphere. So now to take it back a little bit, we had another brief contextualization of how we needed longitude, right? These sailors were able to determine latitude because based on the celestial optics in the sky and the sun. But longitude, what a huge problem. Man, they had to keep doing this with a moving ship and a pendulum and all the things they had to do. Boy, we really should come along and invent longitude immediately. Each ship had an astronomical observatory, which would follow and, perfect the methods of celestial navigation. Not to anyone's especially success, right? It wasn't really helpful to anyone. So if we go through this history, we go through the almanac and all the progression of how we got here, Victorian glory years, how the time servers progressed after that through the 1800s and Greenwich, and let's just kind of stick to where we want our focus to be here. Let's see, let's focus on alright, going back through our Royal Society trek here, we're going to pick up with the observatory at Greenwich, and we're going to do Flamsteed's main task, right? Turning lunar distance method into practical use. 91 years again, getting ready, using Jupiter satellites, other methods, and getting ready for essentially the Board of Longitude. The papers of the Board of Longitude will probably form one of the most curious collections of the results of scientific enterprise, both normal and abnormal, which exists. George Airy, Astronomical Royale, 1858. So this is where it gets crazy, right? So these people instituted what's called the Board of Longitude, which they assigned the commissioners who were appointed to administer government awards or prizes for finding longitude at sea, supposedly. The board was in existence from 1714 until 1828 and did various acts of parliament. So they had Commissioner Royal, Astronomer Royal, Civilian Location, Plumian Professor, Mathematics in Oxford and Cambridge, and 7 Royal Astronomers. So these people all have their own papers, stuff, and contributors. We're going to pay attention to this one, George Airy, as this was Aries from Aries' failure, when he correctly then took the first measurement of non-Earth's motion, when he measured the movement of the stars above Earth. So again, focusing on the moon, getting ready for that supposed transit method, right, to get ready for the position of the sky. They said that they could not adequately model the orbit, so they needed to observe the moon over a whole cycle of 19 years, right, to get the geometry, and then once they had the cycle, then they were ready to roll. So they had this new Astronomer Royal, John Flamsteed, right, did all his required explanatory things, wrote his notes, did his observatories, wrote his papers here, and here is the notes, the timeline, here we go. So directed that the observatory perfected astronomical navigation up until towards the end, Greenwich, used powerful instruments, etc., etc. Let's see here. This is one of the famous ones, right? The chronometer. And here's the paper's famous one. So these are the famous Royals. Let's just go through the chronometer section here. Yeah, so that thing. Whoo! Let's take a look. So back in the decree, right? 1750, let's see, they had an old school longitude method using the quadrant. And again, lunar eclipse was the way to go. Accuracy better than 1 degree. So that was what he published in the British Mariner's Guide, incorporating the new tables for lunar transit. And now they were able to do this within, I think, 15 miles. Hold on. Oh, they got the tables, but it was too complicated for regular people. I see. Okay, so on to John Harrison and the clock. John taught himself how to make clocks, figured out how to do it, did it perfectly his first time, boarded his test ship in 1761. So that was pretty quick. He went to the Board of Longitude to create to claim his gold. Right, he created the best chronometer ever in 1765, got awarded 3,000 for his family, etc. So the solution to this was to create like chronometer for navigation. Yay, defy Newton. Go through the wonderful story of this fairy tale ending where we all now have the wonderful longitude that everyone needs gifted to us from the Royal Society, and they're still going to be using the longitude transit method, etc. So the almanac, 1767, the lunar distance method became a reality, and they finally published the corrective tables needed to use the moon transit method successfully down to 1 degree of accuracy. So to determine the longitude, they had to use the angle between the center of the star and the center of the moon and the star, and they had to use that clock star and determine the parallax, refraction, make the corrections, and then use the time from the Royal Observatory at Greenwich. And using these two, they can use latitude, longitude, and started to use it to navigate. Apparently, that is the story. So the lunar distance method and a sextant and the nautical almanac. That's what you need to use this. So, or you can get a chronometer, a marine chronometer, quadrant, and a map. And you can do the almanac method with the meridian catch-up, right, when you make your observations and correct with those meridian tables. So with this, there's a couple new ways to go, and they were happy going for it. Apparently, according to history, everything was solved after this. So I believe this is just a repeat. Let's go through here. Yeah, so right, this just will leave to the modern territory and to the adoption of the prime meridian in 1884. So they say now that they conclude, although latitude has been measured, right, over the years, it's been crazy. We had to unify for you, and we're looking out for you, and collectivism is great, individualism is bad, etc., etc., etc. There might be some confusion historically. Oh, I see. Oh, the trains are the whole reason. Now the trains can be on time, etc. What a crock of shit. We led to reform for scientific study. Like, this is just nonsense. Anti-meridian, astro-meridian, essentially, but they're telling us, oh, it's actually the best choice we did this. This is why longitude works correctly, or the best. We correctly decided accidentally to do it. Yay. Alright, so they cited the meridian at Greenwich, 1883. They awarded themselves the authority and then pretended not to choose themselves when they gave themselves the authority they put in themselves. Anyway, this is the document that they passed, and this is what the summary was. So, transit instrument of the observatory at Greenwich will be the longitude. They set up 180 degrees longitude lines, shall not interfere with the local and make it the overriding one. They also made the day to 24 hours, kind of a hidden trick there. The conference expressed that they'll be able to practice the astronomical and nautical days. Yeah, they're going to start messing with the calendar. Change it to the decimal system, division of angular space into arc seconds, etc. Boy, they're just starting the atomization and quantification of the world. Universal time, Greenwich time, time zones come from this, so all the groundwork is laid. Oh, they got the tables, but it was too complicated for regular people. I see. Okay, so on to John Harrison and the clock. John taught himself how to make clocks, figured out how to do it, did it perfectly his first time, boarded his test ship in 1761. So that was pretty quick. He went to the board of longitude to claim his gold. Right, he created the best chronometer ever in 1765. Got awarded 3,000 for his family, etc. So the solution to this was to create like chronometer for navigation. Yay! Defy Newton. Go through the wonderful story of this fairy tale ending, where we all now have the wonderful longitude that everyone needs, gifted to us from the Royal Society. And they're still going to be using the longitude transit method, etc. So, the almanac, 1767. The lunar distance method became a reality, and they finally published the corrective tables needed to use the moon transit method successfully down to 1 degree of accuracy. So, to determine the longitude, they had to use the angle between the center of the star and the center of the moon and the star. And they had to use that clock star and determine the parallax, refraction, make the corrections, and then use the time from the Royal Observatory at Greenwich. And using these two, they can use latitude, longitude, and started to use it to navigate. Apparently, that is the story. So the lunar distance method, and a sextant, and the nautical almanac. That's what you need to use this. So, or you can get a chronometer, a marine chronometer, quadrant, and a map. And you can do the almanac method with the meridian catch up, right, when you make your observations and correct with those meridian tables. So with this, there's a couple new ways to go, and they were happy going for it. Apparently, according to history, everything was solved after this. So I believe this is just a repeat. Let's go through here. Yeah, so right, this just will leave to the modern territory and to the adoption of the prime meridian in 1884. So they say now that they conclude, although latitude has been measured, right, over the years, it's been crazy. We had to unify for you, and we're looking out for you, and collectivism is great, individualism is bad, etc., etc., etc. There might be some confusion historically. Oh, I see. Oh, the trains are the whole reason. Now the trains can be on time, etc. What a crock of shit. We led to reform for scientific study. Like, this is just nonsense. Anti-meridian, astro-meridian, essentially, but they're telling us, oh, it's actually the best choice we did this. This is why longitude works correctly, or the best. We correctly decided accidentally to do it. Yay. Alright, so they cited the meridian at Greenwich, 1883. They awarded themselves the authority and then pretended not to choose themselves when they gave themselves the authority they put in themselves. Anyway, this is the document that they passed, and this is what the summary was. So, transit instrument of the observatory at Greenwich will be the longitude. They set up 180 degrees longitude lines, shall not interfere with the local and make it the overriding one. They also made the day to 24 hours, kind of a hidden trick there. The conference expressed that they'll be able to practice the astronomical and nautical days. Yeah, they're going to start messing with the calendar. Change it to the decimal system, division of angular space into arc seconds, etc. Boy, they're just starting the atomization and quantification of the world. universal time, Greenwich time, time zones come from this, so all the groundwork is laid. Right, so here we go, generally through the resolutions and the recent history, where they do lots of things to make you think this is absolutely correct. And here's a laser we're going to shoot through it. We're going to mark it on the sky. There's no way we're messing with this. It's kind of how I took it. But I did think that when they shot the laser, man, poof, that was overkill. Right? No need for a freaking laser across the world. Unless you think, boy, it's definitely not hiding anything here, right? Well, let's see. Alright, going back through our Royal Society trek here, we're going to pick up with the observatory at Greenwich, and we're going to do Flamsteed's main task, right? Turning lunar distance method into practical use. 91 years again, getting ready, using Jupiter satellites, other methods, and getting ready for, essentially, the Board of Longitude. The papers of the Board of Longitude will probably form one of the most curious collections of the results of scientific enterprise, both normal and abnormal, which exists. George Airy, Astronomer Royal, 1858. So this is where it gets crazy, right? So these people instituted what's called the Board of Longitude, which they assigned the commissioners who were appointed to administer government awards or prizes for finding longitude at sea, supposedly. The board was in existence from 1714 until 1828 and did various acts of parliament. So they had Commissioner Royal, Astronomer Royal, Civilian Location, Plumian Professor, Mathematics in Oxford and Cambridge, and 7 Royal Astronomers. So these people all have their own papers, stuff, and contributors. We're going to pay attention to this one, George Airy, as this was Aries from Airy's failure, when he correctly then took the first measurement of non-Earth's motion when he measured the movement of the stars above Earth. So again, focusing on the moon, getting ready for that supposed transit method, right? To get ready for the position of the sky. They said that they could not adequately model the orbit, so they needed to observe the moon over a whole cycle of 19 years, right? To get the geometry, and then once they had the cycle, then they were ready to roll. So they had this new Astronomer Royal, John Flamsteed, right? Did all his required explanatory things, wrote his notes, did his observatories, wrote his papers here, and here is the notes, the timeline. Here we go. So directed that the observatory perfected astronomical navigation up until towards the end, Greenwich, used powerful instruments, etc., etc. Let's see here. This is one of the famous ones. Alright, the chronometer. And here's the paper's famous one. So these are the famous royals. Let's just go through the chronometer section here. Yeah, so that thing. Whew. Let's take a look. So back in the decree, right? 1750. Let's see, they had an old school longitude method using the quadrant. And again, lunar eclipse was the way to go. Accuracy better than 1 degree. So that was what he published in the British Mariner's Guide, incorporating the new tables for lunar transit. And now they were able to do this within, I think, 15 miles. Hold on. All right, wrapping it up here, we have the 1884 International Meridian Conference, where they used the Greenwich meridian and to decide that they would be awarding themselves the prime meridian position 300 years from the point where they decided to take it, right? They said the crucial role in the observatory, that they founded the observatory, marked the beginning of the quest for longitude that they started, and they worked towards the rectifying the tables of motions of heavens, positions of the stars, which was necessary for finding the desired longitude of places and perfecting the art of navigation. That sounds like propaganda wrap-up. Focused on astronomical navigation and observational work, contributing to the correction of the compass in iron ships. I do believe they had something to do with the magnetic declination mapping and or correcting. They said that they had the evolution of new instruments like reflecting quadrant, marine sextant, lunar distance method, etc., and of course the numerous nautical almanacs. They also said that they had contributions to time reckoning, method of longitude, and regulation of time throughout the world, standardizing time and longitude, and as well as the adoption of the prime meridian and establishment of universal time references and time zones, etc. So they had this conference. They extended and pretended to have a national, for you, for not for me, for you type thing, where they pretended to do for the creative greater good and for the collectivism nonsense that they always peddle. And now, of course, this is just for them. They did the tree, they did the whole thing. They got exactly what they wanted. So they have wanted themselves the Board of Longitude to instill in them the acts of longitude to get exactly what they needed, right? Let's go through some of the summaries here. The Royal Society is essentially just guilty, 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 guilty. Here's my works cited. Evolution of longitude, etc. So let's hop over to the next section here. We can just sort of take a look here at what their work in the sea had to do with their work on the land when they started to integrate the geodetic surveys, right, by the early 1800s. So the first measurement of the deflection of the vertical and longitude, we're going to touch back to this one again and again. It discusses the historical development of when they decided to take the measurement of the geoid and the ellipsoid, and when the angles intersected, they would deflect that vertical, put it in the ephemeris table, and then correct later correct to that amount to get back to the line of longitude. So this is a wonderful period because they first pioneered their astrogeodetic measurement process, right? Historically, they're going through this for the first time. They're trying to measure the deflection of the vertical. And they had to really do it for the longitude, right? So in 1837, they processed this procedure, they detailed this procedure, and then started to do it all over through the 19th century. Here's the nautical almanac, again going over when they put out the call for the reward, etc. And here's a couple of pages on geodetic surveying, an astronomical latitude and a geodetic latitude, when they're literally going to push those 2 points together to deflect that vertical. Once they really align their geoidal and ellipsoidal, then they're going to complete pretty much their mission, right? The relationship between latitude and polaris. So that's what they're deflecting to. And then if we look a little closer here, we have a correction chart. Essentially, 16 degrees of deviation is a lot for the geodetic incongruities. So here we go, talking about how they use exactly the sky to measure the Earth. So here's all where we're going with it. The brief historical interlude, I think, will be over. We're talking about a historical portion that was completely inserted into our timeline, put there for us to find, creepily, tailored toward it, left for us. So we're supposed to think that everyone had needed longitude and they came along and helped everyone like they always do. Bullshit, right? I think what really happened is right about 1900 here, they inserted the globe, and the first thing they did was destroy all the maps, and that's why today we only can make projections of this coordinate system that they've allotted here. And ever since then, we've been screwed. Every map we find between then and now is a star map. Even the 1700s concave maps with converging longitude lines, they are star maps. They are all star maps. It has always been about the sky. Don't get lost trying to look at the ground. Always look at the sky to measure the ground. Hi, and just to sort of finish off longitude quickly and concisely, we're going to round it off with some navigation in the south following the 1700 Board of Longitude and all of the things that we just went over. So there's a quick look through one of these chronicles of it. I'm going to go through the book. It's called His Pronouncement, and it's about all of the navigation and the issues in the 1700s, essentially, right? Like, because you think, hey, if you use the sky to plot the celestial coordinates on the ground and then created the globe map as a direct consequence, which is what I'm going to essentially be my position after this, then what you would have to do is use people to plot where this isn't matching the ground and then correct those errors at the expense of people's lives so that you can have the correct map to fool everyone in the future. And essentially, like, if we're to believe what happened here, that from 1700 to about 1900, they had spent 200 years mapping this out and just spending lives. And we'll start with this quote right here. It's from J. von Gumpach, published in 1862. It says, as bearing upon navigation and commerce. It involves the preservation of millions of dollars worth of property and thousands of lives. During those 150 years since the time of Sir Isaac Newton, there have perished at sea, solely in consequence of his erroneous theory, at a very moderate computation, some 10,000 human beings, the majority of them British sailors, and property, in addition, worth having 20 to 30 millions of pounds of sterling. At the present period, the annual losses at sea attributable to the same cause amount to about 500 lives and property valued at about £1,000,000 of sterling. So, again, he's saying equivalently, back then, it's about 500 lives every year and $1,000,000 worth of ships, materials, etc. Just because. All from no other cause save an erroneous astronomical theory. Such losses will continue unless that theory ceases to be applied to the practical purposes of navigation. Wow, that's very strong words, man. It's almost like you're blaming them for, corrupting the mapping system and directly causing all of these deaths. But let's continue. Between 1909 and 1913, Lloyd's lost 213 vessels, total of 260,000 tons, without knowing how, why, when losses occurred. The average of ships lost in this way is more than one a week and represents an actual loss of $500 an hour. After I had studied such statistics at these for a while, it seemed to me that some serious investigation was absolutely necessary. So this is early 1900s, and they're looking back at the same time that I just outlined and observing, hey, right about here, there's a lot of issues and no one knows why and what the hell is going on, essentially, right? So let's look into that a little bit further. We'll go through my database on it, and we'll just real quickly sort of breeze through the application of what we just said, essentially, right? Because if what we said is true, then it would have ramifications and implications. So again, this just goes through basically navigation chapters, what I'm gonna stick to. Of course, on my database, you can always find everything I'm looking at, researching, reading into. It won't be perfectly clean, but it'll all be here. So for this book, I'm going to really just focus on this chapter, the navigation chapter right down here, I think. Yeah, so then we're going to skip there, and I just have some select quotes we're going to go through to show you that by the time this book was written, they had already been very well-known public issues with what the Royal Society had done in the 1700s in regards to longitude and what we didn't cover, which was cartography, which is what they did next, right? So this one, again, is just the quote that I started with, and this says, let's see, another one, to find the charts in errors in declination constantly increasing in the range of 60 south latitude, 110 degrees east, that reached a maximum of 12 degrees for the US and British chart and 16 for the German charts, meaning that they were off by that degree at that latitude for that amount, and the German ones were worse. Like, you guys are really stupid there, right? It is a conspicuous fact that although these errors resulted in terrible disasters, there is little activity as to investigations and apparent attempt to discourage efforts to solve the mystery. I mean, that would be weird, right? Such a state of affairs naturally gives rise to such questions as why 11 to 18 miles in error for every estimation involved at the time? Why the apparent secrecy? The builder published this assertion. So again, one more quote. Assuredly, there are many shipwrecks from alleged errors of reckoning which may arise from a somewhat false idea of the general form and measurement of the Earth's surface. Such a subject, therefore, ought to be candidly and boldly discussed. So these people have no idea of the nefarious intent of the inner workings of these Gnostic people who have, Gnosticism and duality at their hearts and are really on a completely different plane of existence than us, right? Their goals, their things, everything. So these people are trying to understand, how come all the charts are wrong? And then right away, if they're wrong, why aren't we fixing them? I mean, very good, very rational questions, I think. Turns out these people were dealing with the same sort of stuff that we are dealing with today. Looking around like, why has no one fixed this? How can this possibly be wrong for this long? Yeah, this is how, guys. These people have nefariously controlled and made it so. Anyway, this book is going through some of this disasters, and he goes, having cited a few cases, I'll cite a few of the admissions to the relative value of globular and planar theories, especially as it relates to planar sailing, what the globe theory cannot account for. The sailing, day's work, and all the problems solved by the help of the transverse table would be impractical on the supposition that the Earth is a sphere, and for the purposes of navigation, the Earth is treated as flat, except when they spherically correct all over the place to everything, right? So this authority admits that it is practical to navigate the Earth as if it is a plane, and then such admission forms the question, how is it possible to navigate the Earth otherwise? So how would you do it if the claim is globular? So then they go into the tables, the corrections, the amounts, the changes in latitude, literally all the things you'd have to do if you had to navigate a fake sphere chart, a cartographical sphere on a planar physical surface. Like in reality, it's plane, but this map says it's spherical. So how would you do that? Well, exactly how we do it today, it turns out. Right? Because in practice, any rules used by these derived from plane steering and longitude is more frequently found by any other method. So what this is very simple and concise. It's saying that it's all they ever do is use latitude, right? So all the rules that we use are derived from plane sailing. None of that globular correction shit that the people who actually sail used or cared about. They didn't care about that, right? We can find our longitude. They had methods to find their longitude, right? And we just went over that. And taking that with a grain of salt, they could do dead reckoning, they could do lunar transit, they could mark the clock stars around the celestial equator, the ones that they studied depending on their luminosity, and know that when the moon passes through them, they know how long that takes. Thus, they know the theoretical distance of the celestial equator, and then they translate that to the ground to get the proper distance. It's exactly what they're doing. So what he's saying is that we can determine longitude, we don't need your globular corrections, and if we don't use them, it's much safer, essentially is what he's saying. So again, we have more confessions, and this is just about circumnavigation. We already know that that's a circle in either case. That one's easy. And this is another comment on like when they boldly publicly proclaim things, like, you know, when people post on social media with a snapshot and you're like, oh, that's retarded, you did everything wrong, right? Well, back then, people would navigate according to globular theory, right? Take a picture of them, and not necessarily a picture, but snap a picture in the sea and go, look, I'm antipodal to Australia, guys. Not exactly that, but almost exactly that, right? So he says, taking Boston Light as a definitive location, 42 degrees south, 1 degree to north latitude, 7 degrees, 50 minutes south, west latitude, a line from this point, right? So from that city, they drew a line, if it was a geodesic sphere, would go right through the Earth. It would emerge at Boston. Right? Oh, Boston connected to Australia. Boom. It's like, yeah, then they were like, well, that's not really right. Well, what do you mean? We're using a sphere. Oh, yeah, okay. We're going to use a spheroid. Oh, yeah, not quite a sphere, not perfect. Okay. Topographical exchanges, sure. Okay, well, now this line is really through Australia. And this guy is just joking on him. He's like, listen, they're proclaiming that these antipodal points, and he said such lines would not exist on their own latitude, as everyone would know. It'd be actually different to 23 because you guys aren't even calculating oblate spheroid with a sphericity, essentially. So this guy who wrote the book knows all the shapes and can identify when they're incorrectly globularly scaling what they're already doing. And he's kind of on the other side, mapping the world, going, you idiots, look at these idiots over here, thinking they're on the other side of the globe, right? Sailing down. Anyway, moving right along. They have errors in the chart. So Maryland, to find the chart errors, declination constantly increasing until in the region of latitude 60 degrees south, longitude 110 degrees east, they reached a maximum of 12 degrees for the U.S. and British charts. So like literally they found a scale to the errors, and it increases the further you go south. That's what that means. Super easy. Then he says, you know, and this is again a little 150 years later, but remarking and looking back, saying, this is 1862 in September. He says, assuredly there are many shipwrecks from alleged errors of reckoning, which may arise from a somewhat false idea of the general form and measurement of the Earth's surface. Such a subject, therefore, would ought to be candidly and boldly discussed, right? So that one, again, we think we've already read, but it's a very important one when someone's like, well, if it's based on the charts and the corrections are based on the shape of the spheroid, then it seems that we should discuss the shape of the spheroid and why we keep correcting for it erroneously. Essentially, right? They're sending people down these paths with corrections for globular theory, and then they don't apply when they run into planar waters. They apply globular corrections and get all lost and confused. It says the globular and plane theories have very different relative value. And he says the sailing, days working all the problems, would be impractical on the supposition that Earth is a sphere, and for the purposes of navigation, is treated as flat. And this literally just says that, yeah, it is flat, and we treat it as flat, but we try to correct to it as if it was a sphere. Then this guy's just essentially makes the basic rational observation. Well, then, like, why? How is it possible to navigate the Earth on the supposition that it is a sphere and claim that it's not flat? And then, furthermore, why is it impossible to navigate the Earth on a claim that it is globular? Right? So that's a little interesting. Again, backing up what we're saying today. This is another one saying that we only use planar sailing rules, right? And again, the coordinate comparison. So essentially, they notice the same issues we did, to say, hey, well, to the southern portion of the latitude, there'd be a big discrepancy, right? That would indicate that it's much larger in the south than what we say. And then, like, say the darkness would be much longer. And you're like, oh, well, it is notably much longer in the south. All these observations about the south are also true. So that's interesting. Because there are larger water areas and less land surface than the north and south. So essentially, they're noticing all the other tricks that we noticed about the differences between the north and the south. Let's see here. It's another one about, right, so he's remarking when they publicly, again, do these coordinates and they like post themselves in the Boston Sunday Advisor and the Post Globe. He says they display their ignorance. He says they ridicule others who do understand the positions of latitude and longitude on the globular and the planar surfaces of Earth. So this guy is able to tell what stupidity they're doing and what the errors they're making because he has somehow coordinate systems both on the plane and the globe. So like as if the Gleason's map was a perfectly flat projection of a spherical coordinate system, then you could say that he had both, right? And that he was using both correctly to navigate the sea. That can't be true, right? So you're saying that maybe like if he had well, which map did they use for navigation? Let's say Mercator, right? So if he had a Mercator map from where he was, and that was corrected to the globular coordinates as if it was a sphere, and they did given the correction angles to make sure that, you know, based on the fact that this is a sphere, here's what you should do, where you should go, right? But so if he starts with this, say, right, we have this map with the equal area scaling circles that I like to use, and then we'll just transform it on over through the, let's say, right, so he's saying if you had, like, say, a globular version and a Mercator, like, and then you could be like, well, you know, you guys are correcting these longitude lines and these angles, and you're assuming the sphericity, but just for like good measure, he's going to keep a different version of the map on hand for when he should navigate in the south. So it's almost like he has an area like this, and then he has an azimuthal equidistant coordinates vary. So let's just say that we were at, you know, like comparative latitude, and then we could do stuff like this and say, oh, well, now I can proportionally see exactly where I'm going and how to do it and where to scale it. Like, oh, now we can navigate this way. That's so strange. It's almost what he's saying, right? Who do not understand the positions of latitude and longitude on the globular surfaces of Earth. It seems to be that he's almost simultaneously accepting both to be true because he can't figure it out. He's like, well, they're telling me it's this way, but we look at it and navigate it and treat it and math it this way, so I don't know. Essentially, this is all backing up what we just put forth as a discovery of the lines of longitude. They, you know, inserted this in our history to make us think this is exactly how it would be, right? That we need this. But all the history shows how awful this was and how wrong it was and all the errors that resulted. And there's other admissions and observations in this book. You guys should go check it out. It is, of course, in the database on the bottom. And he says, it has also been admitted that whether the Earth is spherical, spheroidal, or ellipsoidal, there is no positive evidence. So back when this was written, they had put forth all these theories, but critical minds had, you know, attacked them, and they had just said, look, we have no evidence of this. We just think it is true, and we really, really like it. And they were like, okay, well, we're going to keep the flat maps, thanks, I don't want to die. Right, so this is interesting. And it goes into the other explorations where they claim to have found the South Pole, and how what they say is Antarctica is actually in a plateau 10,000 feet high at the bottom of a ball. Very strange when they have to admit that it is 10,000 feet high. It's, you know, the basin around the flat Earth, but for them it's a 10,000 foot plateau in the south. Like, okay, it's fun. No problem. Essentially, this is the best quote to wrap up all the issues that we were noticing and all the things that I'm trying to put forth here. It says, this is from South Sea Voyages by J.C. Ross. And it says, we found ourselves every day from 12 to 16 miles by observation in advance of our reckoning. By our observations at noon, we found ourselves 58 miles to the eastward of our reckoning in 2 days. Right, so we're so far off in just this amount of time because we can see from where we're going reckoning, like they're looking at the shoreline, they're looking at things, the landmarks, and they're plotting a linear course there, right? And they're saying when we do that, the corrections and observations that you give me are wrong. Like, they don't work. They're off almost immediately. He says every day, 12 to 16 miles off. Imagine that compoundly scaled to go southward on a journey of 100 miles. Like, yeah, you're going to get screwed up. Says in less than 18 hours, he was 20 miles to the east of the reckoning, where he was in 54 degrees, 20 minutes south. So, wow. It says the reader will note that when the route is taken in east or west, the same results are obtained. Therefore, the resultant discrepancy is not observation and actuality. It's not, or between observation and reality, not between east and west. So it's a scaling problem that goes in either direction, and it's not based on that direction is the problem. So, again, very, very interesting stuff. If we were to consider it with an objective eye and an objective position, we might be suspicious, right? Here's another example of people crashing and then blaming the charts, right? So we had a reputable captain lost his ship, and he was furious, saying, look, it's not my fault. You gave me the charts to navigate by. That's what I was doing. He says, it's the fault of the astronomers and nautical experts, right? So he didn't get in trouble for that, and that's how that works. And then he says, especially if their own conclusions happen to bear out the plain form theory. So the Literary Gazette, back in 1861, which is weird because according to the globular theory, everyone already knew for 7,000 years that the Earth was a sphere, and there was no doubt. So this would be a very weird article to publish back then, it would seem. Or they introduced this in the 1900s, and this was back in the objective times when people were still trying to figure this out, okay? Every existing chart and sea route having been elaborated under the Newtonian hypothesis, it follows that the location of rocks, shoals, and other maritime dangers has all been misplaced in greater or less degree, whereas the true cause, never dreamt of, is an astronomical theory. That's a little bit lofty, but what he's saying is, hey, you screwed up the whole scale of the chart by putting it on this globular theory, and now we don't even know where the goddamn fish are, essentially, right? He's like, look, you moved the cities and the longitude and the whole scale and the infrastructure, so now we can't find things that we used to be able to find, like rocks, shoals, dangers, things like that, right? Very, very dangerous thing for a guy who lives on the sea. He says, permit me to cite another illustration of the skepticism of mariners, who are apparently obliged to remain silent on theoretical problems of navigation, yet are compelled to bear the blame in the case of a disaster. Interesting. You're too dumb to know the charts we made for you to correct you. Don't worry, don't ask about that or worry about it. It's right, don't worry. And then when they crash, they're like, well, you're not allowed to blame the chart, so it's clearly your fault. What a crazy circumstance in which to, progress science. In any case, again, they've said there's so many disasters, right? And this is, again, someone from the 1900s looking back and going, how come this was even possible, right? It says American craft founded in 555 and other misfortunes. All nations have similar lists. It's difficult to understand, with all the wonderful inventions now at hand, how there could have been so many collisions and sinkings. The sea yet takes its toll, and there's much marine work to be done. So much, in fact, that it may take generations of men to complete it. Well, that's interesting, because it's already been a couple generations by this point, and they just reversed their whole understanding of it back in 1700 with the Longitude Act. So this is just a general observation and some other correlations that would coincide with it. So let's try to wrap this up quickly so we can keep this in a manageable, digestible amount of time. And again, all of the information is available. It's mostly on my database here, publicly accessible for anyone to click through. The database isn't meant to be your research library, it's meant to be mine, right? But I don't mind sharing it, so it'll be tailored to notes and things that maybe you may not understand. But if you want to look through, you definitely can. I have no problem with that. So this Macmillan person, he says, the explorer, claimed that he found land very different from the current destinations on the latest and most authoritative maps. So he sailed areas indicated as land that on those maps that nearly all points are incorrect and astronomically in the Arctic region. So essentially other observations saying, hey, you guys have a map that's retarded. I'm sailing over here looking on this planar survey, and it seems to line up with what I'm looking at. Don't know what you guys are doing, essentially. But, when people don't try to confront this problem, right, since it already had a stranglehold on the Royal Society and academia and public figures and the mainstream essentially of that day, right? What could you do essentially? Other last note just says, hey, not only is it interesting that we have to correct all these stuff, but if you wanted, say, a map of the Arctic, right, you can't find one. They wouldn't sell it, can't be found, no one has any idea. And that's just an oddity 300 years ago. But 500 years of this and GPSs and satellites and every inch of this place mapped, and still no one could go to the north or the south, and it's really weird. And yeah, reasons, etc. If you buy all that shit, it's essentially the same problem was instituted here and has never been fixed. So that, ladies and gentlemen, I think will about cover it. The longitude presentation, again, take everything with a grain of salt. Use your own discernment to figure out what you think is the truth. But know that everything from 1700 to 1800, the period that we just concentrated on, all of that information that we're able to discern and comment on and extrapolate and analyze came from the same people who the information was about and who had chosen to inject it in 2014 in the form of a digital, digitizing of an older archive. So where that archive came from, nobody knows. Is it true? We have nothing else to compare it to. So there it is. There's that. Where we should go from here is the application of the longitude and latitude system. We just went over how they mapped it, how they were so focused on it, how they were so important to them, and then we have to ask, okay, well then, what did they do with it? All right, that'll do it, guys. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks everyone for caring enough to do some investigation with me. Thank you.